death of Che Guevara did not occur in the heat of combat or as the result of an uncontrolled confrontation. It followed a sequence that was structured, deliberate, and already resolved before it reached the place where he was being held. What ended Che Guevara's life was not a spontaneous act, but an order. Understanding this requires shifting attention away from the moment of execution and toward the process that preceded it. By the time Che was captured in Bolivia, the question facing those involved was no longer whether he would be neutralized, but how. The framework for decision-making had already narrowed. Che's capture did not create uncertainty within the chain of command, clarified it. His identity was confirmed quickly, and with that confirmation came alignment across institutions that did not require extended discussion. The presence of Che Guevara, alive and identifiable, activated a predetermined logic rather than a debate. The order itself was not issued in a dramatic setting. It did not require a public announcement or an emergency session. It moved quietly through established channels, shaped by assumptions that no longer needed to be stated. In this environment, questioning the order was not prohibited, it was unnecessary. This is a critical distinction. In many historical cases, silence follows fear. In this case, silence followed agreement. The individuals involved understood their roles, the limits of their authority, and the expectations placed upon them. The order did not encounter resistance because it did not encounter doubt. Responsibility was distributed rather than centralized. No single figure stood alone as the decisive actor. Approval existed as alignment across multiple levels, each reinforcing the other. This diffusion of responsibility is what allowed the order to pass without challenge. When everyone assumes necessity, no one assumes objection. The language surrounding the decision was procedural rather than ideological. Che was not discussed as a symbol to be confronted, but as a variable to be resolved. This framing reduced the decision to administration rather than morality. Once framed this way, the order no longer required justification. Importantly, the order did not demand speed. There was no urgency suggesting panic or loss of control. Time was available, and that time was used not to reconsider, but to ensure coordination. Deliberation did not lead to reversal. It led to confirmation. Those closest to the execution of the order were not asked to interpret it. They were asked to implement it. The absence of ambiguity at this level further reduced the possibility of resistance. Clear orders create compliant outcomes, especially when they align with broader expectations. The lack of recorded dissent does not indicate universal agreement in principle. It indicates consensus in practice. Within the structure surrounding Che's detention, disagreement did not manifest because it had no functional role. The outcome was already defined. This is why the order was never publicly questioned in the immediate aftermath. Questioning would have implied that alternatives existed and were ignored. Acknowledging alternatives would have required acknowledging choice. Silence avoided that acknowledgement. In the days that followed, attention shifted quickly from decision to narrative. The order itself receded into background process, while the outcome became foreground event. This shift ensured that focus remained on what happened, not how or why it was authorized. To understand Che Guevara's death, it is not enough to examine the act itself. The act was the final step in a sequence that had already concluded. The order mattered not because it was controversial, but because it was accepted. In the next part, we will examine who had the authority to approve such an order, how approval functioned without formal signatures or recorded debate, and why the absence of objection became the defining feature of the decision. The order that ended Che Guevara did not originate from a single desk or a single voice. Authority in this case functioned as a network rather than a point. Understanding who approved the decision requires examining how power operated across multiple levels at that moment. At the local level, Bolivian military and intelligence officials were responsible for custody. They controlled the physical space, the guards, and the immediate procedures. However, their authority stopped short of deciding Che's ultimate fate. Execution was not a routine action. It required confirmation that extended beyond the site of capture. International context mattered. Che's identity elevated the situation from a local security matter to a geopolitical one. His capture triggered communication with external actors who did not issue direct commands, but whose expectations shaped the outcome. In this environment, approval did not require explicit instruction. It required alignment. This is how authority functioned, through signals rather than orders, through understanding rather than documentation. When all parties recognized the same objective, formal authorization became secondary. The absence of a written directive did not imply uncertainty. It implied confidence that the decision was already shared. Within the Bolivian chain of command, officers understood the limits of their discretion. Detention, transfer, or public trial would have required prolonged exposure and international scrutiny. Each of those alternatives introduced risk. The order that was carried out eliminated risk rather than creating it. This logic explains why the decision did not stall. Those involved were not waiting for instruction. They were waiting for confirmation that no objection would come. When no objection appeared, confirmation was complete. At higher levels, authority was exercised through restraint rather than intervention. Silence from external powers did not represent indecision. It represented approval through non-interference. In systems of power, silence often communicates more clearly than directives. This structure also explains why responsibility remained diffuse. No individual could later be isolated as the sole decision-maker because no individual needed to initiate the order publicly. Approval existed as a shared understanding rather than a recorded action. Those closest to the execution understood this clearly. They were not acting independently, nor were they acting under visible coercion. They were acting within a framework that had already resolved the question. The absence of protest was not accidental. It was structural. The order did not require justification because its necessity was assumed. Once necessity is assumed, authority becomes procedural. People act not because they agree emotionally, but because disagreement no longer has function. This is why later attempts to locate a single approving figure have proven inconclusive. The decision did not depend on a signature. It depended on alignment. In such cases, asking who approved it misses how approval actually worked. Approval occurred when every level of authority understood that intervention would not follow. That understanding closed the space for alternative outcomes. Once closed, the order became inevitable. In the next part, we will examine why no formal record of objection exists, how silence replaced dissent, and how the absence of questioning became the most telling evidence of how the decision was made. The absence of recorded objection to the order that ended Che Guevara is not a historical gap. It is evidence of how the decision functioned. Silence did not follow the order by accident, preceded it. Within the structure surrounding Che's detention, questioning the order would have required more than moral hesitation. It would have required an alternative outcome that was both acceptable and enforceable. No such outcome existed. Once this was understood, objection lost practical meaning. At the operational level, individuals were positioned to execute, not to deliberate. Their role was defined by compliance rather than evaluation. Questioning would not have delayed the process. It would only have marked the questioner as misaligned. In systems where alignment is valued over initiative, silence becomes the rational choice. This does not mean that every individual involved agreed in principle. It means that disagreement had no channel through which it could act. Without a mechanism for dissent, silence becomes the default expression of awareness. The political context further reinforced this dynamic. Che's survival would have created complications that extended far beyond Bolivia. A public trial, imprisonment, or transfer would have required sustained international engagement. Each option risked prolonging attention. The order eliminated attention rather than managing it. In this environment, questioning the order would have implied a willingness to absorb those risks. No authority present was positioned to accept that responsibility. Silence, therefore, was not passive. It was protective. The lack of formal debate also reflects how the decision was framed. Che was not discussed as an individual with rights or options. He was discussed as a problem with constraints. Once framed this way, the range of acceptable responses narrowed. Questioning became unnecessary because the problem definition already contained the solution. This framing extended across institutions. Military, intelligence, and political actors did not need to coordinate dissent because coordination already existed in expectation. Everyone understood what outcome would produce the least disruption. That understanding replaced discussion. Over time, this silence solidified into narrative. The absence of objection was later interpreted as inevitability. What was originally a choice structured by alignment became remembered as an outcome dictated by circumstance. This transformation protected the system from scrutiny. The silence also served another function. It prevented retroactive accountability. Without recorded objection, there was no evidence of internal conflict. Without conflict, there was no decision point to examine. The order appeared seamless, and seamless decisions are difficult to challenge. This is why later inquiries struggled to identify resistance. Resistance was not suppressed. It was rendered irrelevant. The structure did not punish dissent. It made dissent unnecessary. Understanding this dynamic is essential to understanding the order itself. The decision was not questioned because questioning would not have altered it. Silence was not the failure of courage. It was the outcome of alignment. In the final part, we will examine how this silence shaped the way Che Guevara's death was remembered, how responsibility dissolved over time, and why the order remains difficult to trace precisely because it was never challenged. The order that ended Che Guevara did not remain hidden because it was secret. It remained difficult to trace because it was never contested. When decisions pass without resistance, they leave fewer marks. Silence, in this case, functioned as authority. After the execution, attention moved quickly to explanation rather than examination. Official accounts emphasized circumstance, immediacy, and security concerns. These narratives did not require identification of a single approving figure. By focusing on outcome, they avoided the question of process. Over time, responsibility dissolved into structure. Each level could point upward or outward, not because blame was being avoided consciously, but because the decision had not required explicit ownership. When authority operates through alignment, accountability becomes collective and therefore indistinct. This diffusion explains why later investigations encountered limits. There was no document to dispute, no signature to interrogate, no debate to reconstruct. The order existed as a shared understanding rather than a recorded command. Without a moment of disagreement, there was no moment to revisit. Silence also shaped memory. Che's death came to be framed as inevitable, as if no alternative path had ever been available. This framing obscured the fact that inevitability is often constructed after the fact. At the time, options existed. They were simply not activated. The absence of questioning did more than enable the order. It protected the narrative that followed. By leaving no trace of internal conflict, silence preserved the impression of coherence and necessity. History tends to accept decisions that appear unanimous, even when unanimity is produced by structure rather than conviction. What remains striking is not that an order was carried out, but that it required so little reinforcement. No repeated confirmations, no visible pressure, no public justification. The system moved because it understood itself. Silence was sufficient. This does not reduce the gravity of the decision, clarifies it. The order ended Che Guevara's life not because it was debated and won, but because it was assumed and enacted. The lack of questioning was not an omission. It was the mechanism. Understanding this helps reframe how endings occur within systems of power. Dramatic confrontations are remembered because they leave evidence. Quiet conclusions persist because they do not. Che's death belongs to the latter category. The order was approved not by a moment of declaration, but by a condition of agreement. It was never questioned because questioning had already been rendered unnecessary. Silence did not follow the decision. Silence made it possible.